All right, welcome to our Wednesday night Bible study. We are traveling through the book of Genesis, and it is a crazy ride. There's a lot of very interesting people and situations, and we are up to chapter 33 this evening. Chapter 33. We haven't even made it all the way through the book of Genesis, and like I said, we've met a lot of colorful characters and had some interesting situations and interactions. So why don't you find your way to Genesis chapter 33? And while you're looking for that, I will recap just a little bit of where we have been. You remember in chapter 32. Chapter 32 is kind of like a big transition chapter. It's a period in Jacob's life. It kind of goes through chapter 31 into chapter 32 and 33. But chapter 32 is a bit of a transition in Jacob's life. You'll remember that Jacob has just left an encounter with Laban, the end of chapter 31. Chapter 32, Jacob travels on, and he ends up coming to a place where he sees the angels of God. He gets this vision, and the angels of God are there, and he calls this place, this is God's camp. And of course, God is giving Jacob a vision, letting him understand that he's with him, that he's not alone, and in fact that God's army is with him. I think there's a lot to that. Now Jacob knows, as he's traveling back to the promised land, he knows that he's going to end up meeting up with his brother Esau. It's very likely that he's going to encounter him at some point. So Jacob is going to send some messengers. He wants to kind of test the waters. He wants to take Esau's temperature, you could say, kind of metaphorically. He wants to find out, is his brother still angry with him? Does he still want to kill him? And so he sends some messengers out, and the messengers come back, and when they come back saying, we met your brother Esau, we've seen him, and he's coming out with 400 men. That's a bit concerning, and Jacob doesn't know what this is all about. Is this a small army coming out to attack him? What's going on here? And so he panics. We can see that in the text. It doesn't say he panics, but you can read it, and you can see that he's panicking. And so he does a bunch of things. He divides up his camp. He devises this plan that he's going to send his brother some gifts, a number of gifts. He wants to send them in waves or in droves to try to placate his brother, to ease his brother. And then finally, he's going to pray to God. And really, that should have been the thing that he did, and that really should have been the only thing that he did, to be honest. God had mentioned to him, had told him on a number of occasions, I'm with you. I'm going to bless you. You don't have to worry about it. In fact, he got that vision of God's angels, and he says, this is the camp of God, right? This is the army of God is with me. So he should have taken courage. He didn't. But he prays to God. That's a good thing. I mean, it's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. But he's really just trying to do anything and everything he can. He's going to work by his own means, and he's also going to throw up some prayer to God. And he reminds God, you said you were going to be with me, and all of that kind of stuff. So he prays to God. He divides up his camp into two, all his possessions into two, and then he sends out some gifts to Esau. And we find that at the end of chapter 32, that the same night, as all of this is going on, the very same night, he encounters a man, and he wrestles with a man. And we don't know anything, we don't get any indication of this man, who he is. It just says in verse 24, Jacob was left alone. He's all by himself. And then it says, and a man wrestled with him. Now, is this someone who was sent by Esau, a scout, a spy, an assassin? I don't think Jacob has a clue as to who this is initially. He recognizes who it is. At least he gets some interesting perspective later on. And what happens is this encounter, remember, this is a major transition in his life. This encounter with what we find out is an angel. So this is an angel from God. What happens is Jacob is changed. This transitional period in his life, he's changed. Not only does he get a name change, but he also is going to walk away from this encounter with a limp. And every time he walks, and every time he limps, he'll be reminded of this encounter with God. All right, and so that's where we left it. That's the end of chapter 32. So let's look at chapter 33. And we will begin, and we'll look at verses 1 through 11. So 33, 1 through 11 says this, and Jacob lifted up his eyes. Now this is that morning, right? If you go back to the end of chapter 32, it talked about wrestling. It was daybreak, and he walks off limping, and then he lifts up his eyes, right? So again, verse 1, and Jacob lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau was coming, and 400 men with him. So he divided his children among Leah and Rachel and the 2 female servants. And he put the servants with their children in front, then Leah with her children, and Rachel and Joseph last of all. He himself went on before them, bowing himself to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brother. But Esau ran to meet him and embraced him, and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. And when Esau lifted up his eyes and saw the women and children, he said, "Who are these with you?" Jacob said, "The children whom God has graciously given your servant." And then the servants drew near, they and their children, and bowed down. Leah likewise and her children drew near and bowed down. And last Joseph and Rachel drew near, and they bowed down. Esau said, "What do you mean by all this company that I met?" And Jacob answered, "To find favor in your sight, my lord." But Esau said, "I have enough, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself." Jacob said, "No, please. If I have found favor in your sight, then accept my present from my hand. For I have seen your face, which is like seeing the face of God, and you have accepted me. Please accept my blessing that I brought to you, because God has dealt graciously with me, and because I have enough." Thus he urged him, and he took it. He took it. All right, so when Jacob looks up, when he casts his eyes up in verse 1, what does he see? Well, he sees his brother. He sees Esau, but he also sees those 400 men. Now, what's Jacob thinking at this point, right? What's going through his mind? He may very well be thinking, here we go. Here we go. Are we going to have a good talk? Is this going to be a good encounter? Or are we going to have to fight? Don't know. He's not sure. Now, there is a positive change in Jacob, because we see that Jacob ends up going himself in front, right? We'll talk in a moment about his dividing up his family, but he goes in front himself. There's a positive, right? He's going to face his brother first. I think we can look at that as something good, that there's maybe a change in Jacob's life that we can see by him doing this. But everything hasn't been changed completely in his life. He still has some baggage. And what do we see with the way that Jacob separates and orders his wives and the children? What do we notice? What are we seeing there? What are we being told when we look at that? Well, we're seeing that he still is a man who shows favoritism. Jacob is ordering his family in the order of most important to him. And most important is not right up front. The most important is in the back. He's putting the slave wives, the concubines, and their children first. Then he's putting Leah and her children next. And then finally, Rachel and Joseph are last. But he's showing favoritism with all of this. Because ultimately what he wants to kind of be assured of or prepare for is if his brother attacks him and kills him, everybody else will be able to see and possibly escape. And of course, the ones who are further away have the best chance of getting away. So Jacob is still showing he's a man of favoritism here. So even though there's a positive note, he takes the front, right? He goes up front. There's still some issues that Jacob needs to work out. And even though he had that encounter with God, right? He had that transformational encounter with God. He has a name change, and he even has that limp. Right? He's walking with a limp, and he should be recognizing God's with him. So there's been a change in his life. But that doesn't mean that every aspect of his life is now fully in line with the will of God, which is fully, he's fully what we might call sanctified. Sanctification often is this process where God is working with someone or working with his people, and it's a cleansing process. It's a changing, transforming process, but it happens over time. Now, we've seen some of that in Jacob's life, but even with that great event, him wrestling with the angel, does not bring about a complete and utter transformation in his life. We still see some of these issues. And the same is true for us today, isn't it? A person gives their life to Jesus, they repent, they are baptized, they're immersed into his death, burial, and resurrection. They become a Christian at that point, right? Now, quite often what happens is a person will drop a lot of bad behaviors or a lot of issues. Sometimes their life changes radically. They're excited, but there's often things still in one's life, baggage. Sometimes behaviors that we may not even recognize are sinful or wicked, that we have to, or I should say, God has to work with us through. And so I think there's something here as well with Jacob. So we see a positive and a negative, right? We see some growth on Jacob's part, but we also see he still has some of that baggage of showing favoritism. Now, what happens when Jacob finally meets with his brother, with Esau? Well, Esau is happy to see him. Now, it could be that he saw all those gifts coming, and he also sees his brother bowing down 7 times before he gets to him. That could be part of it as well. But regardless, he's happy. He's happy to see his brother. They hug, they kiss. It's a great exchange. It's a great exchange. Now, even though this is a good meeting, this is a good greeting that happens here, there might still be some tension between these two brothers. But no one's looking to fight. Esau is not looking to kill his brother at this time. And Esau asks, after they hug, they embrace, he asks, what's going on with all of these gifts that I saw? All these droves of presents. What's going on with that? And Jacob basically says, I just want you to have these gifts. I want you to have these presents. Esau says, listen, I've got enough. I don't need these presents. I don't need these gifts. But Jacob continues to urge him. And in the end, he accepts them. There may be some ancient custom going on here. Maybe something similar to what happened with Abraham. You remember when Abraham was going to buy a piece of land, he had this conversation with the man who owned the land, and there was a back and forth. Abraham said, how much do you want for the land? The man said, don't worry about it, take it, it's not a big deal. Abraham said, no, how much? I'll pay for it. He says, don't worry about it. Finally there's a price that's given, and the man takes it. This was a very customary ancient way of doing business back then. It could be that there's something similar going on here, that, Esau has all his men with him, Jacob has his men with him, these gifts have been offered. Esau may be trying to, save face with saying, I don't need it, don't worry about it, and Jacob continues to say, no, that's okay, take it. There may or may not be something going on here with that. But in the end, Esau does take it. He accepts those gifts. All right, let's look at verses 12 through 17 now. Verses 12 through 17. It says, and Esau said, let us journey on our way, and I'll go ahead of you. But Jacob said to him, my Lord knows that the children are frail, and that the nursing flocks and herds are a care to me. If they are driven hard for one day, all the flocks will die. Well, let my Lord pass on ahead of his servant, and I will lead on slowly at the pace of the livestock that are ahead of me, and at the pace of the children, until I come to my Lord in Seir. So Esau said, let me leave with you some of the people who are with me. But he said, what need is there? Let me find favor in the sight of my Lord. So Esau returned that day on his way to Seir. But Jacob journeyed to Succoth and built himself a house and made booths for his livestock. Therefore, the name of that place was called Succoth. Okay. At this point, Esau suggests, why don't we travel together? I'll go ahead of you, maybe clear the way, make sure it's all safe, something along those lines. But we'll basically travel together. What does Jacob say? Well, he basically refuses, doesn't he? Now, he does it politely. He does it in a polite manner, but he refuses. He basically says, no, we're not going to do that. I don't want to travel together. Again, he says it politely, but the gist is, no, you go ahead. So Esau offers to leave some of his people with him, right? I'll leave some people behind. They'll go with you. And Jacob says the same thing, right? He says, no. He refuses again. And again, it's very polite. But he doesn't want any of that. Now this, I have to say, this back and forth discussion here is one of the reasons why I believe that there's still some tension between these two boys, or at least Jacob is still a bit concerned or a little bit uneasy with Esau. He may still be worried that his brother is going to maybe do something in the middle of the night, attack him when their guard's down or something like that. We don't know what all the men are doing when the two brothers meet up, right? We're not told if the 400 men and the rest of Jacob's servants and all them are armed and just kind of standing around waiting. We don't know. There's no indication that there's any hostility. But in Jacob's mind, it really seems he's a bit concerned. So he doesn't want Jacob to stay. He doesn't want Esau to stay with him. He doesn't want any of his men to stay with him. No. Go ahead. I'm going to take my time and I'm going to go slow. So Esau leaves. And he travels back to Seir. Now, Jacob travels as well, but he doesn't go to Seir, which he indicated that he was gonna, right? He had indicated that he was going to go to Seir to meet his brother. At least it sounds like he was going to travel on and meet up with his brother at some point. You see that in verse 14, the end of 14. He says he'd meet up with him in Seir, but he doesn't do that. He goes to Succoth, and he settles down there. He builds some booths, and there's a little bit of a settlement. He's kind of making his home for a little while anyways. Now, it's probably a really good thing that these two brothers are in different locations, right? In different areas. The reality is that Esau, he doesn't know if Jacob's changed. Jacob doesn't fully know if Esau has let everything go. neither of them know for sure yet, right? It's going to take some time before they figure out where each other's at. But even beyond that, sometimes people need space. Sometimes people need room. Even family members, right? What is the old saying? Family are like fish. After 3 days, they start to stink. Something along those lines, right? The point is, you can overstay your welcome, right? Even, family members, you love them. But after a certain point in time, you need your space. You need your space. And so it's probably a very good thing that these two boys, these two men, with their herds and flocks and servants and all that, have a distance between them. You can think about it in the same way with Abraham and Lot. You remember that Abraham and Lot's servants ended up fighting one another because the land just couldn't support them. They had so much, and it caused some problems. So they ended up dividing, not dividing, they ended up separating. And Abraham went one direction and Lot went another. So it's probably a good idea that these two men are separated. All right, so let's look at verses 18 through 20 now as we kind of wrap the rest of this chapter up here. So 18 says, "And Jacob came safely to the city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan, and on his way from Padan Aram, and he camped before the city. And from the son of Hamor, Shechem's father, he bought for 100 pieces of money the piece of land on which he had pitched his tent. There he erected an altar and called it El Elohe Israel." All right, so this is kind of a summary statement of what's going on with Jacob and where he ends up settling. Again, we notice that he doesn't end up going and settling in Seir. Now he's over in the area of Shechem. And so he pitches his tent over there. It doesn't say that he went into the city of Shechem, but he pitches his tent there in front or around that area. And he wants to put down some roots, right? So he's actually going to purchase some land here. He's going to purchase some land, and he's going to settle down. If you purchase land, you're going to make a home of it. And now, that doesn't mean that he, as a herdsman, is not going to wander around. At times, you've got to bring your flocks and your herds to where there's water and food and all that. But he purchases a piece of land, and that's really kind of the homestead. And so we see as this chapter ends, it really ends on a pretty good note, doesn't it? Jacob is back in the land. His brother Esau does not want to kill him, at least at this point. They had a good encounter. Jacob has decided he was going to purchase some land, so he's got some land. He's settling down. Everything looks great at this point. And we might think, maybe all the problems and all the struggles and all the issues with Jacob are done. They're kind of behind him. Well, we would be wrong. We're going to see as we continue on that Jacob's problems, Jacob's struggles are not over yet. And again, that's something that we as Christians can think about as well. Just because we come out of the waters of baptism in our new creations, just because we are in Jesus now and we have salvation and we have a whole new outlook on life and God is with us and He's for us and all that, doesn't mean that we are not going to have hardships and trials and struggles. It means God will be with us through those struggles, through those trials, but we will still find ourselves on occasion having difficulties. And sometimes they're self-inflicted, aren't they? We do sinful things, we make mistakes, and we bring about, some struggles on ourselves. And at other times, there's nothing that we have done purposefully or even accidentally that we should be punished or something like that, right? It's not because we've sinned, but life situations happen, and there's trials and things happen. But God will be with us just as God is going to be with Jacob through all that. One more note that I just want to briefly make is, before we leave this chapter, because basically we're done with this chapter, is, there was a prophecy about these two boys, about Esau and Jacob. And Esau is the older, he's the firstborn, and Jacob is the younger. And you remember the prophecy said that the older would serve the younger. Now, sometimes people get the wrong idea. They think that Esau, as the man Esau, was going to be or is going to be Jacob's servant or his slave, or somehow Jacob is going to be lord over him. And even though Jacob has the blessing and the birthright and all of that, what we find out is Esau never serves Jacob. In fact, if you look back at the text over and over again, you see Jacob is bowing down, prostrating himself 7 times before his brother Esau. We see that he says that Jacob says to Esau that he is his servant. Verses 5 and 14, Jacob calls Esau his Lord. Verses 8, 13, 14, and 15. So Esau never serves Jacob. In fact, the opposite, we could say, is there. Jacob gives Esau gifts and blessings and calls him my Lord, and I'm your servant, and all of that kind of stuff. The prophecy was never about these two boys individually. It was about two nations. It was about the Israelite nation and the Edomites. And the Edomites will serve Israel. And we'll see that as the history unfolds further on. We won't see it in the book of Genesis, but as the history in the Old Testament unfolds and continues to roll on, you'll see that Esau, as the Edomites, that nation, will actually serve Israel. All right. Well, God bless you. Have a great week.